Elon is sort of really needed on the battlefront right now because the fight is too close now.
On today's podcast, we have Tanvi Ratna, whose tweet on tariffs and Trump went around the world countless times. We talk about Elon Musk, AI, China, the Fed, a bunch of other crazy important topics in today's geopolitical and economic environment. Without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, guys, welcome to the podcast today. We are very lucky to have Tanvi Ratna with us today. Many of you have recently become acquainted with Tanvi's material. I know that a lot of us have had some discussions about it, and it's really some good stuff. So it's a privilege to have you with us today on the podcast. Very excited to dive into some of these topics that I think are so relevant in the current political, economical situation that we're in. It's all really good stuff. So Tanvi, welcome. Thanks for being with us. Glad you were able to take the time. I know you've been traveling around the world quite a bit lately with all that's going on.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, looking forward to our chat.
We've got some really good things to cover. So you and I have definitely been chatting a little bit before this recording, and I think that what we're going to cover is going to be really, really relevant. For all of those that are hearing your name, seeing your face for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us some background kind of about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I've had a pretty meandering sort of life journey, and it's quite interesting that a lot of those threads of my life are now relevant for where we are today.
Yeah.
So my family is mostly East Coast, but I had the fortune of living across a lot of places. Growing up, I was at Georgia Tech for engineering school. I am an engineer by background, sort of fell into geopolitics. In my second year of college, I stumbled upon a class on it and I did a minor in it. And I'm after working as an engineer for a bit, I moved to policy and geopolitics. I was then in DC for a while. And I started on the Hill. I was in the Foreign Affairs Committee for a while. Then I had an interesting stint across some of the BRICS countries and in Asia. So in the Middle East, and then in India, and then in Singapore. I got a chance to spend close to a decade in that region. I got to work on a variety of interesting things. I got to meet with Prime Minister Modi, who's the current Indian Prime Minister. I got to work on his first campaign to prime ministership. Also got to work on a lot of this digitization in Asia, so EPI sort of revolution that happened. And I've been working on crypto and AI issues globally for the last 4 or 5 years. I run a policy think tank called Policy 4.0. We are emerging tech focused. Most of my time went on crypto, AI, and quantum related policy for the last 4 or 5 years. I did not expect that my commentary on Trump would take off the way it did. I just been tracking everything that they've been doing since probably October of last year. And I was just seeing the moves very differently from most people. I just felt it's a very pivotal time and a very pivotal sort of agenda that he seemed to bring to office. So I started tracking all that, and of course I'm back stateside, so it's the zeitgeist as well. And now at the moment, policy work continues. I also started writing for Fox recently, and most people, as you said, they know me from my writing on Trump, but that is fairly recent. I primarily been someone who works in tech.
It's hard to think of a background that would be more useful in today's environment than that. I mean, AI, tech, geopolitics, that is the forefront of everything. And so there's a lot to unpack there. You've had quite an extensive experience thus far, and sounds like there's a lot more to go. And it sounds like it's always interesting. I feel like there's this constant, oh, you just popped up, right? but really you've been in this space for years, and you've been refining your material and your education and your experience and so on. And it's almost like it takes some time for some of the bigger voices to kind of get a hold of the really good content out there. And I think you're very much in that space. And I also am somebody who just became acquainted with you, fairly recently. But I have I would call it the tweet that went around the world a million times. Obviously, we're a macro hedge fund, and I keep in touch with a lot of the other big hedge funds out there. Bill Ackman with Pershing Square he's always an interesting character and has a lot of great points of view. And I think he's quite prolific on X. He posts a lot of stuff and has a big following there. And it was right around early April that he posted your infamous tweet, and I'm just looking at the date. It looks like it was April 3rd, and that was kind of the Trump, the tariff, the tweet, and it was really interesting because the prevailing opinion at that time was, this is it, this is the end, this is going to destroy everything. And you came in with this very well thought out, clearly stated, compelling to death point of view that really struck everybody. I think I saw your tweet talked about on every major financial news network, every podcaster. Everybody was like, who is Tanvi? And why does she have a plug into like a reality that the rest of us don't? And so you made my radar then, and I've obviously been following you, and I'm very glad to have you on now to talk about some of those things. But I want to dive into all of this, but I want to start it with a question, especially going into that tweet about Trump and tariffs, when everybody was, ringing the panic button. What is your source material? Do you sit and read like actual political publications? I mean, are you a primary source kind of person when it comes to all of this?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, by the way, for the kind words. I was very taken aback by the attention that we got. I actually got that exact DM from Bill Ackman saying, "Who are you?" Like, just like you said, like who was having. So he said something like, "You're very impressive. Who are you?" And I was like, "Wow, I did not expect to see this." And no idea.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I think in terms of source material, so I think my training as a geopolitical or national security sort of analyst has helped a lot. I think the first reason why I see things differently is probably that, because I think we live in a very geopolitical world now, and a lot of people have trouble understanding what that means, why that impacts everything else. And I think in finance and in economics for really long, these have all been separate forces, right? So in classical economic theory, there's complete distinction between monetary, geopolitics, trade, and all these issues, right? Sure. So I think the first thing that probably helps in the way I look at things is when you work in national security or that degree of geopolitics, everything is linked to everything. You're basically using levers that have sometimes second, third order effects, sometimes like sixth order effects, and they're helping you get to where you want to go. If geopolitics happens in long games and it happens in more behind the scenes sort of forces, right? And I think that's probably the orientation I have in the way I look at development. So I'm not really bothered about the surface or first order effect of things when I'm studying things. And I think that's also a criticism I get, where people are like, "Oh, you're very sympathetic to Trump. You think he's doing all these things." I'm not actually going by the individual. I'm trying to see what's happening across the board. I'm trying to look at how different countries are responding and what sort of symptoms you're seeing of the actions. Yeah. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, I've spent a lot of the last few years in crypto. And I think that's just made me think like constantly about the monetary system and currency and financial markets, and how, how fundamentally those are connected to government and policy, and these goals. And so it's, I think, spending a lot of time in these hidden forces which people don't really engage with. I think that's possibly the first and main reason why I see things very differently. I think, secondly, the thing that also, in terms of source materials, since you asked, I think I was tracking a lot of things during their transition period. One of the documents, which was the infamous Stephen Myron paper on the user's guide to restructuring trade. I think that one made me read a lot of other material, which was talking about how deeply geopolitics was fracturing classical economics. And so it was those things. And then I think with Trump, and the first 2-3 months made it very clear that a lot of the calculus for them was on the government's revenues, expenses, and the deficit, right? So the rest of my thread, if you see, is very structured on those aspects. So it's primarily geopolitics, the fact that the world order has changed very fundamentally and in a way that people are maybe not realizing, and how they see tariffs as a way of rejigging multiple things at the same time, and then how they see it also as a way, as like a fiscal tool for more revenues, closing the deficit. I think largely it's these two planks on which most of the thread is built.
I mean, huge, first of all, and super important. And also, I think it's interesting, in the stock market, we very much say, go with the masses. It's not usually a good thing, right? There kind of becomes this group think. I think every stock market participant to some degree tries to be the contrarian's contrarian, right? Because you can't just be contrarian, because if you go against the masses, well, is everybody else doing that? And so you really have to, I mean, it gets down to kind of doing the hard work and not putting in the time and the effort, as you're saying here, and reading some of these things, and not just saying, okay, who are we for? Who are we against? And I think I love that about your material. You don't ever say bad, good, this, that. You point out things that I think people miss because they are more concerned about saying bad, good. We love Trump, we hate Trump. And I think anytime, in politics, when we get to a place where we just blindly love or hate somebody, that's never a good thing. It's what are the policies and what are the underlying pieces there? And I think it's gotten so complex, as you've said, that there is so much material there that I think a lot of people are like, where do I even start? So I'll just watch the news and go with whoever I like, and fine. And so I think it's really interesting. I think there's going to be such a big place for people like you and voices like you that say, okay, noise, adios. Let's really get down to policy. Let's get down to what something is producing. You can say a tree is wonderful, but if it doesn't produce any fruit or bad fruit or whatever, it's not maybe a great tree. But if it does, whether people hate that tree or not, there's something there. And I think you're a breath of fresh air in that space. And so that's really good stuff. And so taking all of that, I want to shift it into something that we have seen this week. And let's talk a little bit about it.
I want to thank you, Jared, and I'm going to make sure my mom listens to this, because when I left engineering, I got an earful for years, because it's almost like you're taking our people back, going into like a policy kind of a field. So I'm going to make sure my parents listen to this. Thank you.
Listen, your parents can call me anytime, and I'll say, Tanvi, she's doing great, and congrats to your parents, because they raised you well. So this week, Wednesday this week, just a couple of days ago, we saw once again the Fed. And the Fed has come, and this is obviously a hotly debated topic in the stock market, in politics, in everything, right? Interest rates remain unchanged. Certainly, in the hedge fund kind of stock market world, there's a lot of opinions about what the Fed's doing and why they're doing it. Certainly in the political arena, there's a lot of opinions about that. Just go, because I have a lot of questions on that. What do you think about, is the Fed on track right now? What role are they playing currently that they maybe haven't in the past?
Yeah, I think it's, I have a question for you, and this is something I've been thinking about for a while. Do you think the Fed is even relevant in an AI age?
No, I think that the Fed's job could be easily replaced by a number of things.
Yeah, and I think, if I think of the big picture, and this is, it doesn't mean that the Fed is not going to be around anytime soon, but I just feel this AI wave that's coming is highly deflationary. And you have basically the economic model itself will sort of shift in terms of what is labor, what are jobs, all of that is going to shift, at least with agentic sort of workflows. If intelligence and goods and things like this become very cheap because they can be done at scale with agents, do you value goods and services the same? Things might just become very cheap, and you have no limit to how far you can scale these things apart from energy. Like, it's the only hard limit on this. So when you have a sort of tsunami, deflationary tsunami coming in, and then you have this institution which is an inflation targeting institution, it kind of doesn't fit. I think there's a lot of fundamental things that will change for central banks. So I feel AI is a big force in that, and I think it will do a lot to transform or hit at the relevance of these institutions. I think geopolitics then itself is a big force, and you can see that now with President Trump, right? Because when you have a very geopolitical environment, then central banks cannot manage by nature inflation that's, let's say, it's coming from structural reasons, it's coming from geopolitical reasons, it's coming from supply chains breaking and things becoming expensive. It's not a money supply problem then, it's a structural problem. And at that point, I think it's heads of state and people like that become much more relevant in terms of decision making and setting the direction of the economy and things like that. So in the medium term, I see like larger questions around the Fed than just the chair. But coming to your point for right now, I think, I'm not the best qualified person to comment on. I think there's a lot of speculation on who will be the next Fed chair. Will it be, Kevin Hassett or Scott Besson, or I would actually love to hear from you on your take on that. I do think politically and geopolitically, I see a couple of things. First, that there is the economic data it's indicating and signaling to enough people that rate cuts do make sense, and if we don't have rate cuts, then that's a question mark, and it will probably need to be justified. I think politically, I think we need to see what happens. So July 9th is a big deadline for the tariffs, and that if they're not getting enough deals, then tariffs are going up for many countries after that period. And then by August 12th, I think, is when they're going to be imposed very strongly on countries. So if tariffs go up, one thing it does is it brings more revenues for the government. So if it brings in more revenues, can they offset that interest expense that they have on financing? And
Sure.
Tell me if I break this down more, but I'm thinking more from the lens of the government's expenditure. That's the major lever that the Fed and the interest rate will influence, right? So the biggest reason that President Trump wants the interest rates to go down is of course, it helps growth, but it will bring down payments on the interest. And I think that was one ploy they had with the tariff announcement, which sort of backfired. And you're probably more of an expert in that space of what happened with the bond markets. And I think whoever comes into office, I think if the economic data continues well, and there's some predictions of the GDP figures also being much higher, I think it's that trade-off, right? If the GDP is already picking up and growth is picking up, then there's a set of people who say, well, why should you cut interest rates? Like, you will overheat the economy. And so I think a lot of the balance, I think, on this decision, it hangs on the economic data. But if I see politically, I think the administration does need high growth after this tariff period. Like, there's just GDP growth is the primary lever that they have of their targets. So they definitely need high growth. And I think geopolitically as well, liquidity is really getting hit in the markets. And I think pressure to sort of, lower interest rates. So I don't know how the nuances of that will get managed, but that's my sort of 2 cents on that question.
We're seeing a lot of different things in the market right now. First of all, obviously in the news, Trump has been pretty vocal about his discontent with Powell, right? And so I always do think, it's funny when we say the word politics, because when we're talking politics, countries being managed and so on, we're like, yeah, politics. But it's funny how that word has translated to like offices. Oh, I left this company because of the politics, right? Yeah. And it's such a bad word in that space. And, and so I think in this area, obviously Trump has been very vocal about Powell being late and all of this stuff, and which we did see a bit of, right? We saw interest rates stay low as inflation went high, and this transitory thing, which inflation ultimately I think was transitory to some degree with supply chain disruptions and so on. But the Fed is historically late on everything they do, and it's not really just a Powell issue. It's a Fed issue, I think. And, I think there's certainly an argument to be made there. But I think the other thing that probably gets overlooked a little bit as well is the fact that when interest rates were hiked this last time, it was a faster, more aggressive rate hike than we had almost seen ever. That took the stock market down, the mags, all the big stocks that have been doing so well, and the big Amazons and Netflix and so on. Everyone just got absolutely obliterated in that. And everybody thought that was the end. These rates are going to go up too much. The biggest recession is going to come. And it was a painful couple of months. And then everything recovered. And I think there is an interesting resiliency in the economy and the country where we keep thinking things are going to happen, right? Rates went really low after 2008 and the housing crisis and that disaster. And nobody wanted to be the person that crashed the economy raising rates. And we had these low rates for, a decade and a half, just about. The Fed's rate hike recently was proof we can handle some stuff. Tariffs, the tariff news obviously hit and crashed the market for days. Really, it was very short-lived. And now the tariff news, and obviously there is time that needs to pass for all of that to set in and see what the real impact is. But there's an interesting resiliency to the market. It's almost like we can throw a lot of stuff at it. I think things are in a lot better shape in certain areas than people think. We see the key numbers. You watch politics and economics closely, and I do as well. And so I look at a whole bunch of different numbers, but it's kind of like gasoline prices. That's everyone's economic indicator. We always hear everyone's dad would drive 10 miles to save 2 cents a gallon, right? Because it's like, listen, I'm gonna get my money's worth. And when gas prices are high, everybody's concerned, and when gas prices are low, it's almost like anything can be going on, and people are like, yeah, but I can fill my car up for $40 or whatever. But it seems that there's this resilience in the market that is very strong. And, and so I think that's where it's a tough decision, right? The Fed could cut rates and maybe things run hot. They could leave rates where they are. And of course we end up paying a lot more servicing debt, but the economy still thrives? It's an interesting place, and that's why I think it's an interesting question of, is the Fed doing the right thing? And maybe the question could be, could they do the wrong thing? Is the market strong enough to withstand kind of whatever they throw at it, I think?
It's a different lens than the one I see, but yeah, I think there is a lot of resilience, and I think even with American businesses, I think that even though the tariff shock has been, I think American businesses have also been adapting really fast. And the Atlanta Fed number of GDP prediction, it was quite surprising, right? Like, why would GDP pick up so much in the midst of this sort of a shock?
I love the surprises. It's all the loudest voices and the talking heads that just get it wrong so much. And so, what is the argument or the point or the narrative that most people are missing about AI? I mean, yes, it could replace some jobs and it'll make life easier, and probably it's very deflationary, I think is good to say, but is there something that comes up in your mind that nobody's talking about that is probably pretty significant?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of those things, and I wonder why world leaders are not in alarm about this. But if you just talk about job displacement and labor issues, I think it's, this public conversation is stuck in this binary that AI will kill jobs or AI will create new jobs. But I think the reality is so much more nuanced, and it's frankly much more disruptive than that, because AI is going to fundamentally change the nature of work. That is going to change the nature of the institutional structures around that work. So to give you an example, I mean, in terms of AI and labor, there haven't been enough good, even empirical or theoretical work. One of the major ones was actually by, the Nobel Prize winner Darren Acemoglu. He'd worked on a framework, an economic model, which is looking at the impacts of AI in labor and labor displacement. The whole framework of how you measure tasks in economics, he's basically looking at two pillars in which AI can impact the model, right? First is that AI can either automate some tasks, or AI can augment some tasks. So it either displaces a human or it helps a human in a task. And we will use this framework, and we will measure what the trade-offs are of introducing AI into the labor market, and we will be able to model and measure its effects. And this was all right, but this maybe worked for an earlier era of AI, right? Now you have, right? So you have AI agents. They can create new tasks. They can replace entire workflows. They can autonomously coordinate processes. They're going to fundamentally change this human machine interaction far beyond just automation or augmentation, right? And it's going to happen at a speed and pace that we're not prepared for. So we don't even have any models in policy which can anticipate the effects of these kind of workflows. And that is scary because, and I think labor is one component of it, but I also feel like GDP itself, like I was telling you, if goods and services start becoming very cheap, then what do you value? Like, will you value the same things? Or will you start ascribing value to other goods in society or other kind of services? So we are at that sort of an inflection point, and I just feel like there's simply not enough serious work happening. And I'm very glad to see that in this administration there is an AI czar, and there is a whole division that is looking to this, and they have already articulated good moves, I think, on compute infrastructure and this diffusion rule, things like this. They've made some moves on skilling, AI skilling in schools and things like this. But I think the economic frameworks, those are very important because those are the foundation of all policy. And so if we don't nail those well, then we don't even have the right models on how to think about. It's those second, third order effects, right? So we don't have good models.
Right. It's interesting to think about that with our current lens. We're coming from this very non-AI world and trying to think about what that can mean. It's the typical looking back on historic events and thinking, how did we get that so wrong? And, we're about to become a historic event, and we're going to look back and think, wow, that turned out differently than we imagined. And so I think that's super interesting. The inability to even understand the changes that will be happening is interesting, much less the changes themselves. And so I think the AI discussion's an interesting one. We live in a world full of inefficiencies. 10 times a day, I scratch my head and think, who thought of that? Why do we do that? And to think, the world will probably be unrecognizable in the next 50 years. It's kind of funny to think about the big things that have happened, right? The printing press and the whole industrial revolution, really. And it's like it gets more significant every time. And everybody loves to compare AI to the internet boom, right? The 2000.com, all of that. I think that's probably a fair comparison if we look historically back. But these changes, these fundamental shifts are like 10x or 100x the previous one. I think that comes with a lot of surprise. And I think the one thing that will never change is human nature, which is us incorrectly estimating what is ahead of us. And so there's always this shock. And so I think the world that my kids live in will be so very different than the world that I live in, and that you and I live in, right? That's going to be very interesting. And I think this world of, is it just going to wipe out jobs, right? That, of course, is the topic of so many conversations, but I love what you say, which is it's so much more significant than that, right? It's going to be a shift in what we prioritize and what we want and do. That is wild. So, and as you mentioned, there's an AI czar, and the Trump administration is doing a lot of really interesting things in crypto space, in AI space. What direction? And you've had some great material, and I'm going to post, by the way, your tweets. They'll be included in the show notes here, because I think it's really important for people to see this and read through it and kind of get a feel for it. But where do you see the Trump administration going? There's a short period of time to do a lot of big things, and we know everything moves slow in government. So in the next couple of years, tariffs, dollars, importance of dollars, just the whole policy, what do you see kind of coming?
Yeah, I think they're all there's a lot going on in all these theaters. I think maybe we can start with even just AI, because they're doing so much on that space itself. And I think one thing that's been very interesting for me, even from if I put on my geopolitical hat, is just how much the center of the world has sort of shifted to the Middle East. There is somehow the geopolitical rise of the Middle East is this story that not many people are talking about. But I don't think, the fact that Trump has ignored everyone from Brussels to anywhere in Asia, but he made that stop in the Middle East and visited all those countries. It's not a coincidence, because if you also see China, that is exactly the route they're taking as well. Like that, this is the region that is somehow now at the center of everything. And I think there was something said in that. So the AI czar, David Sachs, who we spoke about, he had this talk in Saudi Arabia when he signed the deal. And there was a very interesting statement there that I'm surprised that not enough geopolitical analysts are latching on to this. The Saudi official said that we are elevating this 90-year-old partnership So he's mentioning the petrodollar and that whole alliance, that we're elevating this to move from energy to the digital age. The entire relationship, and you can see that with UAE, you can see it with Saudi, and the strategies they have in place with UAE has the entity called G42, if you've heard of it. But they're setting up these massive data centers, and there's this Kazna data center in Saudi, and they have like internationalization plans to it. There's it's spread all over Turkey and Middle East, and they'll start catering to the demands of so many countries and regions. I think this administration sees it as one of the core sort of geo-economic sectors, right? I think AI is the new petroleum, and it's the new petrodollar, is like the new, it's the AI dollar now. So, and I think this has happened very fast and not enough people are paying attention to it. But I think the rise of AI as a sort of frontier geo-economic theater is a very big thing. There's just a lot going on between the US and China, and I think there's a lot to unpack on this US-China tech war piece. But
certainly the US-China entire relationship is interesting. But I do want to go back to what you were saying in the Middle East, and I think that is very relevant because what we hear about the Middle East is oil, right? Oil. And this just feels like something that has been losing importance for a long time, stepping aside, and that there's something else coming here. And I think that's such an interesting point about the Middle East, their AI push that they're making, and the fact that Trump is focused on that more than so many other places, right? Europe is a tough place right now. Asia's a bit of a tough place. The Middle East side of things is very interesting, but I do want to talk about the China side of things as well, because we have the two largest economies in the world sort of at odds and the tech war going on, because before with China, right, it was they can produce a lot of stuff, but where are they in the idea space, right? And I've seen a big shift in that over fairly recently, right? Instead of China just makes a lot of stuff, China's inventing stuff now, and they're latching onto the AI side of things. Where do you see how do you see that whole relationship developing?
I think that is one of the most fascinating theaters for me to track personally. Since President Trump came into office, you can see that China's been closing the tech gap or the AI gap very steadily since he came into office. And I think that is very deliberate, because it started in Jan with DeepSeek, and then Manus, and then Quen, all these models, which have they're out competing a lot of the top American models, and China's gotten there despite those chip sanctions and things like that. I think there is a reason why they also have pushed this in this period, because I've been tracking a lot of, what has China been doing since the tariffs, right? What has China been doing since Trump came in office? And it turns out they've been very busy, and they've actually gotten a lot more deals than we have, in the same period. And they've been going around a lot of different countries, getting into partnerships. And interestingly, they also focus very heavily on the GCC. So their backyard is the ASEAN countries. And I think they've deepened their bilaterals significantly with those countries in this period. But they had, very interestingly, this ASEAN GCC China summit. And they are themselves looking at this whole region as a new kind of corridor. And what China is doing now is in all its trade deals is it's positioning itself as the high-tech partner. So they are talking about how places like Vietnam, Malaysia, and all these countries, they bring in the advantages of labor cost or resources, and China brings in technology, and the GCC brings energy and investment and all these things. And when you hear that, you're like, that was always like America's positioning. This happened, like, so, but it's happening, and it's happening very fast, and they're getting these deals because China's signing more of these no strings attached deals, like, so if you see the Saudi UAE partnership, it's actually a partnership, and it's a fairly intensive commitment, from both sides. But what China is promising is tech plus capital plus the so historically they've always had hardware. So if you had to put the fight in a sentence, it was that China always had hardware and the US always had software. Now with DeepSeek and Manish and all these models, China is closing that software gap, and they are making software open source. If they make it open source, then that actually goes and hits the business model of American AI companies, because then it's like, how are they charging for this? Why won't people just go use the Chinese model? That's what happened. A lot of people started using the Chinese models. And so China can then make money on the hardware. So if they embed those models in robots or cars, or because they have that manufacturing might to like churn that out at a scale that very few countries can. So you're seeing that game play out actually in real time. And I think actually a big reason that Elon also left the White House, apart from their frictions, and this is again an instance of me just reading things very differently, is I actually, a lot of people were fixated on the political debate, and I was just thinking, like, I don't think these people came together just for political reason. I don't think they split up just for political reasons, but I think Elon is sort of really needed on the battlefront right now, because the fight is too close now. And David Sachs himself that the estimation was that China is at least a year or two behind on AI, and now the estimate is that they're maybe 3 months behind or 6 months behind on AI. So it really is a race. It is really a AI war. It's like an arms race now almost.
I think everybody could spend a couple of days, weeks, months digesting all of this, because there's so much stuff to take into account as we pivot into this new world. How can people kind of continue the conversation? How can people follow you, and where are some of the best? You said you're writing for Fox, and you have obviously a very busy Twitter X account, and what are some spots people can keep track of you?
Yeah, so my X account is the primary place where I post material. I also write a Substack from time to time, and I started this Fox column recently. I am going to kickstart some fairly deep dive and interesting conversations on this reset, but from the lens of different countries. So that is something that I will announce soon, and that is something I'm very excited about. That will be a new format or output that I will be sharing soon.
Super interesting, and I will certainly be keeping track. And of course, I'll post all the places that people can follow you. The social media spots where you're posting great stuff. I mean, sometimes I look through your threads and I think, are you AI? Because this is this is great stuff. You compile this ridiculous amount of information into a thread of tweets, and I think, wow. So congratulations to your brain. we need more voices that can think through the noise and talk about the real topics. And so I thank you for that. And I thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure. And obviously, we very much hope to have you back in the near future and hear, all the things that you're up to and how they're going. So thanks again, Tanvi, for your time today. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And it was a pleasure.
Thanks, Jared. Pleasure to be here.